It started with a silence no fan wanted to hear, the kind that follows bad news. Caitlin Clark, the heartbeat of the Indiana Fever, was sidelined. Her absence wasn't just a hole in the lineup. It was a gaping wound in the team's identity. But in the smoke-filled backrooms of Fever management, a plan was being set into motion. They weren't going to wait. They weren't going to fold. And in that moment, the name Odyssey Sims shot to the top of the list. A veteran guard with fire in her eyes and something to prove. When the news broke, it didn't drip out, it exploded. Odyssey Sims signed to a hardship contract. The headline screamed. For some, it was relief. For others, confusion. Why Sims? Why now? But to those paying attention, the answer was obvious. The Fever had been here before, scrambling to fill gaps, grabbing pieces midseason. Sims was different. This wasn't a patch job. This was a gamble. A high-risk, high-reward move in the middle of a season that was already teetering on the edge of disaster. Hardship contracts aren't handed out lightly. They're the emergency glass you break when there's no other option. And in the Fever's case, with Caitlin Clark gone, there was no other option. Sims wasn't just the best available on paper. She brought something the stat sheets couldn't fully measure: attitude. She'd been through wars in this league. She knew what it was like to walk into a locker room mid-season and immediately shoulder the pressure of expectation. The question wasn't if she could play, it was whether she could stabilize a team on the brink. From the outside, it looked like a clean transaction, player out, player in. But inside the Fever's front office, there was tension. Some believed that without Caitlin Clark, no signing would matter. The season was essentially on life support. Others saw Odyssey Sims as a lifeline. She wasn't Clark, but she could keep the ship afloat just long enough. It wasn't about replacing the superstar. It was about buying time. And in sports, time is often the most valuable currency you can't buy. For Caitlin Clark, watching from the sidelines had to sting. She wasn't used to being a spectator. The court was her stage, her kingdom, and now someone else, Odyssey Sims, was stepping into her role. That kind of substitution isn't just tactical, it's emotional. Every possession Sims took, every shot she launched, will be compared to Clark. And fair or not, the narrative was already forming. Could Odyssey Sims fill the void? Or would she crumble under the crushing weight of those expectations? Odyssey Sims' resume reads like a map of the WNBA. Dallas, Los Angeles, Minnesota, Atlanta, Connecticut. She's been everywhere, adapted to every system, faced every defensive scheme. That adaptability was exactly what the Fever needed. In a league where rosters can shift overnight, being able to plug in without hesitation is a rare skill. And Sims didn't just adapt, she produced. Scoring, playmaking, even defending bigger guards despite her 5 feet 8 inches frame. She had built a reputation for doing more with less. But this assignment was different. This wasn't about fitting in. It was about carrying the load. Her scoring credentials couldn't be ignored. That 32-point game against the Phoenix Mercury earlier this year was an anomaly. It was a statement. Sims went 10 for 14 from the field that night, carving up the defense like it was nothing. She's a score-first guard, yes, but with enough ball handling skills to take pressure off teammates like Sophie Cunningham. The Fever weren't bringing in a placeholder. They were bringing in a weapon. And in Clark's absence, someone had to pull the trigger. Whether that firepower would translate into wins was another story entirely. But there were doubts. At 5 feet 8 inches, Sims is considered undersized in a league where taller guards can dominate matchups. Defense, especially against teams like the Los Angeles Sparks with their length, could be a problem. Ari McDonald, whom Sims effectively replaced, brought a different kind of defensive energy. Quick hands, relentless pressure. Sims' game leaned more toward offensive bursts. The gamble was clear. Indiana was betting that what they'd gain in scoring would outweigh what they might lose in defensive grit. And with playoff hopes hanging by a thread, that was a dangerous bet. Even with the risk, Fever fans didn't hold back their excitement. Social media lit up with welcome to Indy posts, highlight reels of Sims' best games, and of course, speculation about Caitlin Clark's return. Natasha Howard fanned the flames, posting, "See you soon, CC," hinting that the wait might not be long. That's where the tension deepened. Because if Clark came back soon, Sims' role would change instantly. Would she fade into the background? Or would she carve out a permanent spot in the rotation? Under hardship rules, that decision would come fast. The Fever's hardship contract history gave the signing more intrigue. They'd pulled from the Los Angeles Sparks before, like their temporary stint with Ari McDonald, and gotten solid results. That connection seemed intentional. Sims knew the style, the pace, the grind. But familiarity doesn't always guarantee success. The Fever weren't just plugging her into a rotation. They were asking her to carry point guard responsibilities in high-pressure games. It wasn't a cameo. They were handing her the steering wheel, while the team's most valuable player recovered. Inside the locker room, the mood was mixed. Some players welcomed Sims as a boost they needed. Others quietly wondered how her presence would change the team's dynamic when Clark returned. The Fever had developed a certain rhythm without Clark, a slower pace, more ball movement, a shared scoring load. Sims, with her aggressive style, could disrupt that, but disruption isn't always bad. Sometimes shaking the snow globe is exactly what a team needs to find new identity. The real question was whether that identity would include both Sims and Clark harmoniously. Caitlin Clark's absence wasn't just a roster change. It was a cultural shift. Her leadership, her ability to take over games, her magnetic pull on fans, all of it was missing. Odyssey Sims couldn't replicate that aura, but she could bring her own. She wasn't the golden child of the league. She was a battle-hardened veteran who'd clawed her way into respect. That chip on her shoulder? It could be exactly the edge the Fever needed, but it could also clash with the culture Clark had built, especially if egos started to collide. The pressure on Stephanie White, the Fever's head coach, was mounting. Fans saw her on the sidelines, sometimes more engaged with referees and her players, and they questioned her every decision. Bringing in Sims wasn't just a basketball move. It was a coaching challenge. White would have to manage rotations, egos, and the delicate balance of preparing for Clark's return while maximizing Sims' abilities in the short term. One wrong move, and the locker room could fracture. One right move, and this could be the pivot point of the entire season. From the sidelines, Caitlin Clark had a unique vantage point. Watching the game instead of playing it changes everything. You see missed screens, unexploited openings, defensive lapses you'd never catch mid-play. Clark's time off could sharpen her basketball IQ, but it also meant watching someone else run her offense. That someone was now Odyssey Sims. And every pass Sims made, every shot she took, was an unspoken reminder. The Fever could still function without Clark. That kind of realization can motivate, or it can haunt. Fever fans aren't casual observers. Therefore, at one game, they displayed Clark's image on a USA flag above the players' tunnel, a symbol of pride and patriotism. While some questioned the appropriateness, most saw it as a tribute to the player who had transformed their franchise. But the image also highlighted the truth. This team's identity is tied to Caitlin Clark. Odyssey Sims could step in, but she would always be viewed in Clark's shadow. That shadow was long, and living it would take a mental toughness few players possess. Sims' career numbers offered both hope and caution. Multiple seasons averaging over 14 points per game, including a remarkable stretch with Dallas where she shot 53% from the field and 50% from three. Low turnovers, solid assist numbers when needed. She had the efficiency coaches dream about. But those were snapshots, not guarantees. The Fever weren't getting the Sims of years past. They were getting the 30-year-old Sims of today. Experience can be an asset, but in the WNBA, legs tire fast, and the grind is relentless. The stakes were clear. Without Caitlin Clark, the Fever were in danger of sliding out of playoff contention. Sims wasn't just here to keep them competitive. She was here to keep them relevant. Every game she played would be magnified, every win celebrated as proof the gamble worked, every loss dissected for signs it was failing. In sports, narratives shift quickly, and Sims' narrative was already forming. Savior or stopgap. The Fever season might hinge on which role she embraced. Clark's eventual return was inevitable, but the timing was everything. If she came back too soon, the risk of re-injury loomed large. Wait too long, and the playoff race could slip away. Natasha Howard, see you soon, post hinted at a near return, but near is a slippery word in professional sports. In the meantime, Sims had the stage. The question wasn't whether she'd keep the seat warm. It was whether she'd leave her own imprint on it. In some ways, the situation was a blessing in disguise. Without Clark, the Fever had been forced to find new ways to win. More team-oriented play, different scoring threats, a deeper bench. Sims could slot into that evolved system without the pressure of mimicking Clark's style. But the blessing came with a curse. The second Clark returned, the old system would reassert itself. Could Sims adapt again, this time into a secondary role? Or would she resist fading into background? Every signing in the WNBA has ripple effects. This one had waves. Sims' presence meant someone else's minutes would shrink. It meant shifting defensive assignments, rethinking offensive sets, adjusting chemistry on the fly. Those changes don't happen without friction, but friction can also create fire, and fire is exactly what the Fever needed. Whether that fire would burn their opponents or themselves was the looming mystery. Her first games in an Indiana jersey would be telling. If Sims came out firing, hitting shots, pushing the pace, the fan base would rally. If she struggled, the murmurs would start. Should the Fever have looked elsewhere? In professional sports, patience is a luxury few can afford, and Sims' audition wasn't going to be long. Every possession mattered. Every decision would be judged against the backdrop of what Caitlin Clark might have done. And somewhere in the back of every fan's mind, the comparison was unavoidable. Caitlin Clark is a franchise, the star, the face on the billboards. Odyssey Sims is the fill-in, the emergency call. But what if she was more? What if she seized this moment and made herself indispensable? That's the subplot nobody saw coming. The possibility that this hardship signing could evolve into a season-defining move. The WNBA isn't just about talent. It's about timing. Sims' arrival coincided with a critical stretch of games, matchups that could make or break the Fever season. Every win without Clark would be a statement to the rest of the league. Indiana isn't just a one-player team. Every loss would reinforce the opposite. That kind of pressure can crush a player or sharpen them into something unstoppable. Stephanie White's rotations would be under the microscope. Too much Sims, and critics would say she's overshadowing Clark's eventual return. Too little, and they question why she was signed at all. Coaching at this level isn't just about drawing up plays. It's about managing narratives, controlling optics, keeping a restless fan base engaged while the team navigates turbulence. And right now, the Fever's turbulence was off the charts. Sims had been here before, walking into a locker room mid-season, learning names, learning plays, then being expected to perform instantly. That's a skill set in itself. Most players need time to integrate. Hardship signees don't get that luxury. The urgency is immediate, the stakes high. And in Indiana, the urgency was mixed with expectation, because this wasn't just any vacancy she was filling. This was Caitlin Clark's spot. Fans debated endlessly online. Some said Sims was a perfect choice, a proven scorer with veteran poise. Others said she was past her prime, a stopgap who couldn't possibly replicate Clark's impact. The truth, as always, would be written on the court. But in the meantime, the speculation served its purpose. It kept the Fever at the center of the WNBA conversation. The first time Odyssey Sims took the court in a Fever jersey, all eyes were locked on her. Every dribble, every glance at the basket carried extra weight. The crowd wasn't just watching. They were measuring her against the ghost of Caitlin Clark. Even as Clark sat just feet away in street clothes, Sims didn't flinch. She attacked the rim, looked for her shot, and barked instructions like she'd been there all season. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. In that moment, the Fever weren't just surviving. They were fighting back, one possession at a time. But the WNBA is ruthless, and the honeymoon phase for a hardship player is brutally short. By the second game, defenses were already adjusting, cutting off driving lanes, forcing Sims into contested shots. That's when the question shifted from can she fill in to can she adapt? Caitlin Clark's game thrives on drawing defenders, creating space for teammates. Sims had to manufacture that space herself. The physical toll was immediate. Every possession felt like a battle, every point earned through sheer will. And yet, she kept coming, refusing to give an inch. The fans were torn. On one hand, they loved seeing someone play with Sims' intensity. On the other, they missed the flash and flare of Caitlin Clark's game. The deep threes, the precision passes, the charisma that could electrify an arena. Sims brought grit, not glamour. And while grit wins games, it doesn't always sell tickets. This tension was building quietly in the stands, on message boards, and across social media. Was the Fever's temporary identity shift a good thing? Or was it pulling them further from the brand they'd built around Clark? Stephanie White knew the balancing act was delicate. Give Sims too much control, and you risk alienating the team's offensive anchors. Keep her too contained, and you waste the reason you brought her in. Behind closed doors, there were film sessions dissecting her every move, conversations about which plays to run, which matchups to exploit. White had to coach not just a team in front of her, but the team she'd have once Clark returned. Every decision now was a chess move for a game that wouldn't be played for weeks. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark's rehab was moving forward. Rumors swirled about her return. Some said within 2 weeks, others thought longer. Clark herself stayed mostly quiet, occasionally offering sideline encouragement or laughing with teammates during timeouts. But her presence was impossible to ignore. For Odyssey Sims, it was a constant reminder that her time in the spotlight was borrowed. That's the cruel reality of hardship contracts. You're always one roster move away from being expendable, no matter how well you play. And yet, that uncertainty seemed to fuel her even more. The Fever's playoff hopes were still alive, but barely. Each game without Clark was a test of resilience. Sims provided bursts of scoring, flashes of the player who once torched Phoenix with 32 points. But she couldn't be everywhere at once. The team's chemistry was evolving, sometimes for the better, sometimes awkwardly. The rhythm was different. Plays that used to flow through Clark now depended on improvisation. That unpredictability kept opponents guessing, but also kept the Fever guessing about themselves. Were they building a stronger foundation or just treading water until their star returned? Opposing teams weren't blind to the situation. Coaches drew up game plans specifically to exploit Sim's size, sending taller guard to post her up or block her passing lanes. She responded with speed, weaving through traffic, pulling up for mid-range jumpers when the paint was closed off. But in a league of elite athletes, quickness alone isn't always enough. The margins were razor thin, and the Fever's margin for error was even thinner. That reality made every turnover, every missed shot, feel heavier than it should. Off the court, the narrative was shifting. What began as Odyssey Sims replaces Caitlin Clark was morphing into, can Sims save the Fever season? Analysts debated it nightly on sports shows. Some praised her ability to step into an impossible situation with confidence. Others said the Fever were wasting valuable time trying to mold their offense around someone who wasn't part of their long-term plan. The truth was more complicated. Sims wasn't just a stopgap. She was a test case for whether the Fever could truly adapt when their star wasn't available. The team's veterans saw value in Sims' presence. Players like Natasha Howard appreciated the veteran leadership she brought, the way she held teammates accountable during practice. Younger players noticed her professionalism, arriving early, staying late, studying the playbook like her job depended on it, because it did. That work ethic rubbed off on the locker room. If nothing else, Sims was helping solidify the Fever's culture, proving that even in adversity, standards couldn't slip. In a league where momentum can turn overnight, that kind of influence might be more valuable than any box score. And then came the whispers. What if Odyssey Sims stayed? Under hardship rules, the Fever could keep her if they didn't sign another player. The idea seemed far-fetched when she first arrived, but as games passed and her contributions piled up, it became a real possibility. That would mean recalibrating the roster, redefining roles, and perhaps even asking Clark to share the backcourt spotlight in a way she hadn't before. The potential for a dynamic duo was tantalizing. But in the WNBA, egos and ambitions can be as tricky to manage as any defensive scheme. The media loved attention. Headlines practically wrote themselves. Sims making case for permanent spot. Clark's return complicates Fever backcourt. Every post-game interview was an opportunity for a soundbite that could feed the storyline. Sims played it cool, praising Clark's talent, saying she was just there to help the team win. But there was steel behind her words. She'd been in this league long enough to know that moments like this were rare, and that if you wanted to turn a temporary job into a permanent one, you had to take it. Clark's return eventually became inevitable, but the question shifted. In what role would Sims remain? The Fever's offense was designed for Clark's range, vision, and speed, but Sims had proven she could create her own offense in ways that forced defenses to respect her. The prospect of running dual guard sets, alternating attacks, and pushing tempo was exciting. It also posed a challenge. Could the Fever integrate two strong personalities and distinct styles without losing cohesion? History in the WNBA is littered with talented duos that never quite clicked. In the end, the Fever season would be defined by more than just Caitlin Clark's injury or Odyssey Sims' arrival. It would be about how they navigated the chaos, adapted under pressure, and decided who they wanted to be when the dust settled. For now, Sims had the ball, the spotlight, and the opportunity to reshape her career. Clark's shadow loomed large, but sometimes the brightest lights shine in the darkest moments. And in Indiana, the darkness had given way to something unexpected: hope.